Well, we're just waiting for the mayors to arrive at what's called the Climate Summit for Mayors, or maybe the Nightmare Summit for the Climate. Boris Johnson is going to be here, and I hope to grab him afterwards and press him on a few questions and try not to let him charm the pants off me.
One might almost say, hearkening back to some of our childhoods, that this is almost a super friends meeting of mayors here.
I think the key is how to find a strategy which can sustain growth at the same time minimizing our footprint.
So we can't sit around and wait for the federal government to act when our constituents really want something changed, and I think they do.
My impression worldwide is that the city mayors are much more united around the world than the federal governments are.
Per capita emissions, London emits 5 times more than São Paulo. We are 11 million inhabitants and we produce 15,000 tons of waste per day.
There's the mayor of São Paulo going on about this massive methane capture from landfill, and they're burning it to produce energy. Unfortunately, all that was sold as clean development mechanism credits to the rich world. So effectively, all the good that the São Paulo has done has been negated by equally bad stuff taking place in the rich world, so they can buy it all as offsets from São Paulo. And I think that's disgraceful.
One quick action to improve that is to reduce the consumption of meat, which is one of the main causes for emissions in Norway and in Brazil, for instance.
We ate fish last night.
We're putting in a huge range of measures to decarbonise as much as we can of London's vehicular fleet.
So what I want to advocate is not just a reduction in consumption, but also a virtuous pattern of green consumerism. And we think that if you persuade people that they can cut their fuel bills by insulating their homes, then that is the way to go.
So do we have a first question?
Thanks very much. I'd just like to ask each of the mayors in turn to name the city that they believe is the world's greenest.
We don't need to compete with each other. We don't need to say, oh, I'm better than the other. Or, I know you disagree, but...
You've got to harness the appalling egos of
okay.
politicians. I just think that there's a fantastic natural flywheel of energy that George Monbiot rightly points to. Why not get cities more actively to vie with one another for the title of the world's greenest city?
Because Copenhagen was already appointed.
Hey, George.
Hi, how are you doing?
How are you?
Thanks. Yeah, good, thanks. Very good. Look, the question I had was, you made a pretty good show there, as usual, and you talked a good talk.
It's very kind of you to say so, George.
But at the same time, you have abandoned this, or you're abandoning Ken's proposal for a gas guzzler enhanced congestion charge.
Yeah, that would have made, as you very well know, George, that would have made a really infinitesimal difference to both to CO2 and to particulates.
Well, no, that's not true, Boris. I mean, you're talking about getting rid of the most polluting vehicles, the Range Rovers, the Porsches and the rest of it, which have a disproportionate impact, considering, yes, there are not many of them, but each of them has a very high impact on CO2.
I know. The impact is tiny. But what you're doing is and what I think appeals to you Graniad types, what you love about it is really giving a kick to what you think of as excessive consumerism, excessive consumption, ostentation, wealth, posh people.
But shouldn't we be doing that? Shouldn't we be giving them a kick?
That's a very interesting question. Should we be attacking people just for having expensive possessions?
No, just
I'm not
producing
certain.
A massive carbon footprint way above what most people produce. Shouldn't we be doing that?
I think that it's much more profitable, as I argue, to encourage people to greatly to reduce their carbon emissions with the sense that in so doing they can better themselves and better their lives. And you know as well as I do, the big savings in London are to be made not with vehicular transport, though we're going to have a revolution in London with electric vehicles, but the big savings are to be made initially on domestic and commercial and business properties. That's where we're launching a fantastic programme to retrofit. And rather than beating up on the banks and telling them how evil they are and they must get rid of their Porsches and all this sort of grawny out stuff, which I understand is what you get off on. Because what there is in these programs are huge financial returns. We did 42 buildings in the GLA group in London. In 1 year, we've been able to save £1 million in energy bills. Now that's a fantastic financial saving. 70% of London's CO2 comes from these buildings. If we address that problem, rather than dickering on about sort of, the politics of
It had nothing to do with the question I asked. As a very learned man, you will have read your Orwell, and you will know that Orwell said about Second World War rationing, that the lady in the fur coat stepping out of the smart car does more to destroy national morale than a whole squadron of Hitler's bomber planes. And if you struggling along on your bicycle, having done everything you possibly
I go very serenely. I go very slowly. I obey the laws of the road.
If one struggling along on
one's bicycle,
why are you struggling on your bicycle? Well, because there are not enough cycle lanes for a start in London. Anyway, you're doing one's utmost to cut one's carbon emissions, and some plonker goes past in some massive great Range Rover.
I understand where you're coming from. You feel viscerally. I'm unable to feel the same sort of hatred of rich people that I know other people do.
It's not a hatred of rich people, it's a hatred of these massive, disproportionate carbon emissions that some people are producing.
I understand the emotion. All I'm saying is I think there are more productive ways of reducing CO2 rather than getting wrapped up in a sort of class struggle rhetoric on people driving Porsches. I drove an electric Porsche, and I think an electric Porsche presents you, George, with a very substantial ideological difficulty. Now, are you in favour of an electric? It's zero carbon. It's not low carbon. It's zero carbon.
Well, it depends where the electricity comes from, doesn't it?
Well, okay, if it's renewably sourced, then it's potentially zero carbon. Now,
what
can I ask you? What is your attitude to a zero carbon Porsche?
Fine, no trouble
you love
at all. I'd drive one myself if I could afford it.
Would you? Okay. I want a Porsche, says George Monbiot. I think we've got our headline.
But what about this Thames Estuary airport?
Well, what I certainly think we should do is not exclude any option at the moment. And
why not? Why not say that is just as damaging as far as the climate is concerned as a third runway? More so. It's going to be bigger.
One day, just as you have been confounded and reduced to extreme intellectual incoherence by the prospect of a zero carbon Porsche.
Quite the opposite. Total consistency.
One day, because you attack people for driving. Because you quoted Orwell as saying nothing. What if the woman in a fur coat, or rather in a lookalike,
because she was undermining the rationing system.
What if she steps out? What if she steps out from a zero carbon Porsche? How would you feel?
The whole point of Orwell's example was that she was undermining rationing.
How would you feel?
In this case, you're talking about undermining carbon cuts.
No. What you
and it destroys the morale of people who are trying to reduce their own carbon footprint. Isn't the example obvious?
Would a zero carbon Porsche destroy morale as well?
No. In fact, it could even build morale. Boris, thanks very much.